The house was finally quiet. Mr. Gibson was resting in his room. I made my way up to the second floor to the room where I was to sleep that night. I remember stopping in the middle of the hallway to pick up the notebook I dropped. When I came back up, I saw the linen closet at the end of the hallway open. It was strange because I hadn't been up here for hours. I made my way down the hall and reached for the doorknob. The tiny loaf of bread fell out into the hallway. I never expected where it came from. I got divorced about a year ago. Thankfully, it was a mutual decision and no one had to go through a lot of trouble. We didn't have any children, and my now ex-husband moved to a neighboring town for a better job. We got married young, which meant that I chose not to finish my college degree. Literally the worst decision I ever made. I had a small amount of experience helping in child care centers. The only job I could find was at a home health agency. It really wasn't that bad of a job, aside from cleaning adult fecal matter. It was just two lonely people keeping each other company. I felt like I learned so much from them, most of them having impressive resumes or decorated military backgrounds. 3 months ago, I was assigned to Mr. Gibson. I was told that he has been through 15 aides in the past year. When I asked why, they basically told me that no one got along with him and he fired them. I wasn't thrilled to walk back into a situation with a man that didn't want me around. Our first day went pretty smoothly. Mr. Gibson had ALS disease. He had limited functioning in his muscles and was completely bedbound. He was still able to talk, but required machines to breathe and for nutrition. I remember the day when we started hitting things off. He kept clearing his throat. I ignored him, thinking he was just trying to get some phlegm out of his throat. Finally, he said, "Maggie." Turning quickly, I replied, "I'm sorry, Mr. Gibson. I thought you were just clearing your throat." He mustered up a chuckle. "Not quite, dear. Will you come over and cover my legs?" I walked over to the hospital bed and laid his wife's quilt over his legs. "There, can I get you anything else?" He stared at me for a moment. Mr. Gibson couldn't have been more than 50. It was sad to watch someone so young wilt away like he was. I could tell that he used to be well built. The depleting muscle mass left him looking like a bag of bones. Finally, he asked, "Are you married?" "No, I'm not. I got divorced a few months ago. It's just me and my pooch now," I said as I walked back to the stove where I was preparing dinner. I heard him groan as he attempted to move. "Do you think Anita will ever come back?" Mrs. Gibson had left last year shortly after Mr. Gibson started to take a turn for the worst. The agency said she had some sort of mental breakdown. She hasn't been back since. I put the ladle beside the pot and walked back over to Mr. Gibson, placing my hand on his. "I think that no matter what, you're going to be just fine. For what it's worth, you've got me." He made an attempt to smile. "You're all right, Maggie. I think I'll keep you." I took that day as a personal accomplishment. It wasn't a glamorous job, but if I could help just one person, then it was worth it. Each day I went around the house and cleaned up. After a while, it became like my own home and maintaining it. Mr. Gibson was a pack rat, though. He told me about the garage sale adventures he would go on as a younger man. He affectionately talked about trinkets that were displayed around the house. Although it was nice to see these from time to time, I started to notice more stuff the longer I was there. In one of the bedrooms there were stacks of newspaper clippings. A handful were hung up on the wall. Many of them were historic events, such as the 9/11 attack, presidential elections, and world news. Others were local mishaps, such as burglaries, a handful of unsolved murders, and a string of abducted children that had never been found. The mountains of newspapers were too overwhelming for me to tackle that day. I left and shut the door behind me. I went back into the living room that had been converted to a room for Mr. Gibson. "How long have you been collecting newspapers?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "I guess all my life. I always liked getting to see a physical piece of history." I began to reposition him as he had refused to move positions earlier in the day. I think I'm going to move some sort of piles of newspapers up to the closet in the hallway upstairs. Mr. Gibson's hand gently grazed my arm. It was all he could move. No, don't do that. Just leave them where they are. If you move them too much, the ink can be disturbed and smear. His voice was more urgent than usual. My husband had, at times, debilitating OCD. I figured I'd better leave well enough alone. The following weeks were uneventful. The daily routine remained the same and my duties went unchanged. 2 weeks ago, though, I started noticing trails of breadcrumbs going down the hallway upstairs. Each time they led to the closet door. When curiosity got the best of me, I tried the doorknob, but it was locked. Last week, Mr. Gibson had requested I start staying overnight on Tuesdays. I could tell he was continuing to decline, and we would become closer. I think he was afraid to be alone. Last night, it was my first night staying overnight. I finished all my chores and carried my tired feet up the stairs to watch television. Mr. Gibson was resting downstairs for the first time all day. When I noticed the linen door open, I also saw the breadcrumbs. I walked toward the closet door to conveniently peek in and see what Mr. Gibson was hiding. As the small loaf of bread fell out of the closet, a small hand was trailing behind it. I jumped back, swinging a door wide open. A small figure was huddled in the back corner. I could only see long strands of black hair, a ratty mattress, and a small bucket of antique toys. The young girl exited from the closet as I quietly told her it was okay. After studying her, I realized she was one of the little girls that had been abducted a few years earlier. She was older, but hadn't grown much due to malnutrition. I went ahead and called the police. They requested that I meet an officer at the hospital with the girl. They asked if Mr. Gibson could be left alone for 15 minutes until an officer could respond. I reassured them that he would be fine. I asked the girl to wait for me in the foyer by the front door. I walked quickly back to the hospital bed where a sleeping Mr. Gibson laid. With a flick, I switched off his breathing machine. Immediately, he started to gasp and gargle for air. I made sure to place his hand near the tubes that gave him air and separated the tube. That night, I found out that Mr. Gibson had abducted all of the children in those news articles. This girl had been kept in the closet for over a year. He molested her every night by instructing the girl on what to do with his hands and genitals. I don't know what he thought he was going to do when he lost his speech. His wife left last year because she found this girl in the closet. Conveniently, though, she left the girl behind. I'm still shaken up at my rash decision to take Mr. Gibson's life. I really don't care, though. I didn't have anything going for me anyway, and I sure as hell didn't want him to die painlessly. Next time, no matter the circumstance, I'm following my gut.